our second panel for our 2023 Beloved Community Global Summit. We're here at the King Center in Freedom Hall. This room that we're in right now is actually named after Yolanda D. King, the oldest child of Dr. and Mrs. King. And we're honored to be in this space, even with this namesake that we so value today. We have this great panel discussion that we're about to have. But before we get started now, we need for you, everyone who's watching, viewing right now, to share this broadcast. If you're watching it on Facebook, share it on Facebook. If you're watching it on YouTube, just copy the link and go over and share it on your social media platforms. Text it to some people. Email it to some folks. Let's get this message out there because we believe it's very important. If you're watching on Twitter, retweet. If you're watching on the King Center website, stay on there. Bookmark that King Center website. Keep it with you at all times. Thank you so much for viewing, for watching today, for engaging. Be sure to tweet using our hashtags. Hashtag BCGS, hashtag Transform Unjust Systems, hashtag Beloved Community Mindset, and tag us at the King Center. As well as our panelists that are joining us today, where their organizations they're with, we invite you to engage those organizations as well once they mention those. We appreciate your presence. Our theme for this summit is cultivating, it starts with me, cultivating a beloved community mindset to transform unjust systems. We're continuing a discussion. These panels are just a continuation. So we started out with this great interview conversation this morning or this afternoon with Dr. Bernice A. King. And we continue now with the tangible outcomes of this strategic convening. Why are we gathered here? Why are we together? So I want to introduce our panelists for this conversation, starting on the end here with Jill Savitt, who is the CEO of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. And we also have with us Karen Ryan. You want me to say your whole name, Karen? Because once I learned it, I was just like, I want to put the Diane in there. Karen Diane Ryan, who is the Senior Human Rights Advisor at the Carter Center, two powerful organizations here in Metro Atlanta. And rounding out our trio here on the stage, but we also have two virtual guests. We have Dr. Bernice A. King, CEO of the King Center. Welcome to each of you. As I always tease you, Dr. King, welcome to your own house. Welcome, welcome. We have joining us virtually Dr. Neil Lester. Dr. Lester is the Director of Project Humanities at Arizona State University.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Afternoon, rather.
Afternoon. I know, I'm all mixed up too, Dr. Lester.
Well, we're in different places, so we have to be just
places.
good
Thank
moment.
you for joining us today.
Yes.
And we have Carlos Rodriguez, who is the founder of the Happy Nonprofit. Is that right? I like the name of it. Carlos is my favorite social media follow. He gets me together in my faith. Tells me I'm not acting too Christ-like. I have to say, oh my goodness.
Accountability.
Yeah, accountability. Thank you, Dr. Lester.
Big hugs from Puerto Rico to everybody over there.
Thank you. How are you doing in Puerto Rico?
We're doing good. You know, it was a hard season, the hurricane season, but we're now coming back to, doing the work that we need to be doing, and an incredible honor to be joining every single one of you here.
Well, it's our honor to have each of you here at the King Center today. You too, Dr. King. Always.
It's my honor to have each one of you all here at the King Center today.
As we get started, let's talk a bit about the theme. I hear us talking about it all the time now because Karen and Jill have joined us for some other events, and we're just standing around saying what a great theme this is and how important it is. Cultivating a beloved community mindset to transform unjust systems. As partners in this work, why is that theme important? How does it bring us together? Start with you, Jill.
Well, you all covered it this morning, but it bears repeating. You are what you think about. And what is in your head is what you will live out. If you've got a lot of anger, that's who you are. You're going to be anger. If you've got compassion in your mind, that's what you'll live out. So it bears repeating. I'm glad we have the chance to explore this more. that if we're going to do this work, we have to be thinking in this way at all times. So I think that's important for the theme. And I think events like this and the whole conference, the whole summit is so important because it's nourishment for people who are doing the work. We can't remind ourselves enough how important this is. And there's a tuning fork quality to this to get us all on that same positive hum where we can start to strategize and advocate and hatch plans to change the world. But it's important for us to all do it from the same place, and we might disagree, but we build the bonds of trust and affection by reminding ourselves how important it is that we each have to do that internal work to transform in order to work together.
Internal work. What about that, Dr. Lester? Let's talk about that. How important is this theme in connection with what Jill just mentioned, internal work? Dr. Lester?
There he is.
I don't think we can do any of this work until we look inside, and that's part of the challenge here is acknowledging that not everybody is willing to do the work, and we're not always willing to do the work when we're doing the work. You know, we get discouraged. I say I can't speak on behalf of we. I get discouraged, and I have to remind myself that I need to reset. You know, sometimes the computer is not working and it's frozen, and you try punching everything on the keyboard, and then all of a sudden somebody will, why don't I turn it off and turn it on again? And then it's like, voila, it's working. So I think the mindset has to do not only with those who are engaged and in the trenches, but reminding ourselves that we can hit that reset button or hit that pause button and get this kind of nourishment that this particular summit and these kinds of gatherings do throughout the year.
They help us keep our eyes on the prize. That's the way
Absolutely.
I've been thinking about it. When I was growing up, we had to watch that documentary in school.
Yes.
But I grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama, though I might have had a different experience. We were immersed in Black history.
Yes.
So we watched Eyes on the Prize every year.
I still use it.
Dr. Lester, you know the theme song? I won't make you sing it, but
you don't want me to sing now because that's a different show now. Right. Keep your eyes on the prize. Yes. In fact, the students are often surprised because it's so relevant even now when you talk, where's the prize? Does it keep moving? Is the field goal where it needs to be? But keeping the eyes and figuring out exactly, well, where is it now? It's just like moving traffic. You know, the stop sign may be there, the lights may be there, but every now and then that traffic is not going to be the same pattern that's always there. So keeping the eyes on the prize, the destination.
And when you said reset,
yes,
Dr. King said, reset. So I want to go to her now to see what you think about the need to reset. How does this type of gathering help us to keep our eyes on the prize and to reset, get our focus back?
Yeah, so for me, it's really about, first of all, we're at the beginning of a new year.
Mm-hmm.
And most people at this time of the year are trying to reset. They're trying to refocus. And having this at this particular time is so strategic for me because there's so much stuff in our world that really, as Jill said earlier, inside, I mean, we got a lot of toxic thinking that's happening. And this to me is like the detoxification process for getting us positioned to really make the kind of impact we need to make. You know, I was thinking while everybody was talking, you know, cultivating this mindset requires some everyday grinding, you know, and the only way we can get there, to me, is really consuming what nonviolent thinking is about. Because that's really what it is. I mean, we can say we have this toxic thinking, but how do we get people to the right thinking? And nonviolence gives us a framework for the right thinking. It helps us to understand what we need to be thinking about. You know, what things we need to include in the equation. So that's what I was thinking about, because I won't say everybody, But it seems like we're in a very challenging situation right now in our world. And if we don't do something to reset the way we are operating, we're going to be in serious trouble.
Mhm. Mm. Sometimes I just pause to think on the panel. I'm like, that's true. Your dad said we're caught all together. We're all in this together in this big
Yeah.
world house. So
Yeah.
our toxic thinking it's influencing things happening all around the world. In Puerto Rico, for instance, the results of lack of care demonstrated by our government
Yeah.
has impacted horribly people in Puerto Rico, so much so that people don't even realize that not just in terms of humanity, Puerto Rico is a part of us, but like legally and
They are part
logistically,
of us.
that we have to be educated. Carlos, when we think about this convening from a faith-based perspective, what's your insight on the importance of people from different faith traditions and backgrounds resetting and getting a cultivation of our mindsets?
It's literally impossible to do it with one framework. The work that matters, the work that actually transforms a whole community. I mean, just the fact that you guys are talking about Puerto Rico just fills my heart with so much joy, because here I am, literally in an American colony, in a place where I can't vote for the president who decides where my cousin goes to war to, in a place where I have to pay taxes for a nation that doesn't give me representation in Congress. So, you know, that whole thing about taxation without representation, here we are 100+ years later. But if I was just stuck in the one mentality of my one church in my one community and trying to, and assuming incorrectly that just this one mentality, this one framework, this one experience is going to solve the problems of a whole community that's very diverse, that has a multitude of problems and issues, systemic issues that need to be addressed, then we're going to be left behind. Then the actual work that I'm trying to do will not get done. Actually, and dangerously, I might become a hindrance to the actual work that I want to get done, because I'm assuming that I'm the solution and my way is the solution, and it's the way that my preacher preaches about the solution. And so humility has to be the key, an open heart and an open mind. And in a season, and here we are, right, in a season of life where I think it's given us a gift, and it's the gift of clarity. I'll say, for me, I was living in the States. I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina, 2016, the elections happening. And it was in a bizarre way a gift for me to define, oh, actually, this is what I believe. If you think that about Black Lives Matter, about even that statement, then this is a line that I have to draw in our relationship. And that gift of clarity helped me then say, okay, this is what I believe. This is what I stand for. This is what I want to fight for. And yet at the same time, because I really know what I believe in, I can have an open heart to have different discussions, to be challenged in the things that I believe in. And so going back to that, especially in the faith tradition as a Christian, the key is humility. We know from scripture that God approaches the humble, not the prideful. So I have to keep a humble heart, even through different faith traditions, different experiences, to find the solutions that we need.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you. Karen, even when I go to Liberia, I see a Carter Center office. When we think about a beloved community mindset and embracing the world house, can you talk for a moment about how it might be impossible to really love people around the world unless we cultivate a beloved community mindset?
Ooh, thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
Because this is all one thing, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if we're talking about transforming unjust systems, we have to realize here in America that our country is so influential. It has so much power. And so what we do here, both within our own cities, matters everywhere, but also in our Congress and in our White House. You know, one of the gifts, and it's so great, the Carter Center being neighbors with you here in Atlanta, 2 Nobel Prize recipients, 2 people, human beings who were sort of prophetic in their time of, and for President Carter, it was his insight as a Christian. This idea of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, isn't that, you know, and in in the Talmud, everything else is commentary.
Mhm.
You know, right? This is going, President Carter says, going with changing times, but sticking with eternal, universal principles, right? This is what we have to get back. The reset that we're talking about is a reset of values, as Dr. King said, a revolution, a reset of values. And what should we value? So for the Carter Center, thank you for mentioning Liberia, all over, through all of our programs, we're always thinking about the person, the people involved, putting people at the center. President Carter put human rights at the center of his foreign policy. This was very controversial at the time, right? It's like, what do you mean? It's geopolitics, it's the Cold War, et cetera. No, if we really believe, you know, that in the golden rule, putting people first and understanding our power extends in the world, that we think of people, we will have different policies. And the mindset you're talking about, every policy that we see, whether it's in the city of Atlanta, on our housing policies, whether it's our foreign policy in Israel-Palestine, that policy starts in the mind of someone. So we must start with our minds and then go back to those eternal principles, human rights, the oneness of humanity, the golden rule. How should we adjust our unjust systems around those principles, the human being?
I want to encourage everyone, thank you, Karen, to, if you don't have already, Mrs. Coretta Scott King's memoir, Coretta, My Life, My Love, My Legacy, to get it today, to tweet people about it, post about it, tell people to get it, because in it, she expounds on what this beloved community is. We want the mindset of the beloved community. We need to know what it is, right? And she says that the beloved community, in one place, she says, it's a state of mind. So in actuality, in order to even create it, it has to become a state of mind in me first. So I wanted to ask you about that, Dr. King. When we think about, sometimes we're so external in our approach. This convening, the strategic convening, is about it starting with us. How do we, you mentioned it earlier, but some people might not have joined us. When we talk about cultivating a state of mind, you mentioned input and output earlier. We want to revisit that before we go into the next question. Why is that important for partners, for coalitions to focus on changing our thinking?
Well, I mean, Jill said it at the beginning, you know, our thinking influences everything that happens. You know, everything starts with a thought. If I don't have a mindset that thinks about how what I'm about to say or do is going to impact people or a person, if it's in that kind of situation, then anything can happen, you know, out of the collection of my life experiences, good, bad, ugly, and indifferent. And so spending time on a daily basis, we talk about it around here a lot, doing a thought audit is so important, you know, assessing every conversation, every encounter, every engagement, every decision. And how often do we do that? We're kind of just going through the motions of, you know, life every day in whatever situation that we're in, whatever job responsibility, whatever assignment we're in. But are we really conscious about, you know, did I say that right? Did I do that right? Was I sensitive to? Was I understanding of? Or I just need to get it done. I just get it done, you know? And I'm guilty of that. And that's why I'm saying it. It takes a lot of work. We don't want to do that work because we want to just we want to check off the list, you know? We set out these goals. So what's the quickest way to check it off the list? And I'm saying we can't do that anymore because we're harming people, we're damaging people, we're destroying communities, we're destroying the environment, we're destroying lives. It's time to have this kind of interruption and disruption with people. So if I don't say anything else today, I'm saying to everybody, make a thought audit a part of your daily life, literally.
And because the title of this panel is tangible outcomes of this strategic convening, we want you to list that. Write that down right now. You can frame it as, I'm going to give you some C's. I work well when I have, things I need to do and everything starts with the same letter at the front. I can get it together. Getting old, I'm approaching 50, y'all. Y'all laughing.
You were laughing.
Yeah, because
Because
we're on past that.
we're well past that.
I'm getting close to 50.
Young lady.
I need the C at the front. So we want you to commit today to thought audits. Commit to cultivating a different mindset.
And
That's
can I add something to
Sure.
that as a part of that? Because it's not just looking at what I didn't do. It's having, something on the other side that says, am I loving?
Mm.
Am I kind? Am I generous? Courageous? I mean, there's some things that we have to measure too, because it's not about just removing the stuff. It's about getting the stuff in us that need to be there so that we can output.
Right.
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 So all of that has to be a part of the process.
Nonviolence helps with that.
Exactly.
As a philosophy and methodology, nonviolence for me, I'm talking about personally, even in my relationships with my family, helps me to assess my engagement. Am I kind to my nieces and my nephew? Am I courteous? Am I genuine? All of those things, when we get into the principles of nonviolence helps with that. So we want you to list that. Go ahead.
Could I add something here? What's interesting about this is hearing just how radical it is to pause and to be mindful and to think, because that's not exactly what society rewards us for. We're supposed to do things in sound bites. We're supposed to, go through the drive-through. We don't want to wait in line. There are all these ways in which, and the thinking, I think, has to be balanced at least with unthinking, the ways in which we have moved and acted without thinking and then had to suffer the consequences of that. So I think that's the radical part of this, is when you are told, for example, that you should be stomped on, spit on, and you still look to that person or the group or that idea with love and embrace and the kind of radical spirit that the beloved community represents for me. That's the part, because society tells us we need to be competitive. It is not about community building. It is about competition. This is about unity and the community. And that's to pause and stop and do that when the rest of the world say, but you got this to do and this to do and this to do. You can't possibly stop to do that. And you say, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And that's what mindfulness is, and the self-reflection and all those pieces that we all put together, that puzzle of nonviolence. So wanted to add that radical piece because it seems appropriate also.
It is radical to be thoughtful and to be mindful.
Or to think. It's radical to think,
Hey, Dr. King said nothing pains some people more than having to think. And
it's work. It's work to think. Trust me, I've been thinking, and I'm not always thinking, but it's hard to think, and sometimes we don't want to think. But I think or to self-reflect for that matter. So
go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I struggle just personally because of my personality and want to get things done and feel passionate. I struggle with all of this. My brain fills with thoughts, and so I don't want to set people up for disappointment. You're not going to get there tomorrow.
Right.
It's very hard. And one thing that I've learned along the way is a step to getting there is to just notice what you're thinking is very helpful. I start to get on that Twitter, which is, I got to get that off my machine because it does drive you, to a place. Get so angry. And then your heart starts to beat faster. And then you start thinking negative thoughts and you start wanting to name call the people. You can get down the rabbit hole very quickly. And so as a first step to getting to a different mindset, you could say to yourself, I notice that I'm doing this, just to be aware of it. And I think Dr. King is absolutely right. You have to quickly fill your mind share with other kinds of thoughts. Because if you leave it empty or open, the bad stuff, if it bleeds, it leads, clickbait. We know what works. Anger works to get attention. And those other kinds of thoughts are much harder to give oxygen and air to. But this mindfulness that Dr. Lester brings up is notice And you can notice it physically too. We react to these things with our bodies. And that's how you can start to cultivate that different mindset, is by saying, okay, I'm doing that again. I'm going to turn that off and put something else, not junk food, but something nutritious in my brain.
Before Karen and Carlos share, I just want to reiterate the first thing we're doing as a tangible outcome, stick with us for days 1 and 2. We're committing to thought audits and to changing, cultivating even, because cultivating is different than changing. Cultivating a beloved community mindset. I want you to make note of that, write it down, type it in your device, that we're committing to this. And one of the major outcomes of this convening is we want people around the world to make that commitment. That's number one. That's the first tangible outcome.
That's right. And I wanted to tell the story of a woman, a filmmaker, Dia Khan, who made a film called Meeting the Enemy, White Right, Meeting the Enemy. And this is a woman, South Asian background, living in the Netherlands, facing incredible racism growing up. And she decided, she's been to the United States, and she decided she wanted to ask white supremacists why they hated her. She just couldn't understand it. And so she made a film, it's called White Right, and I recommend checking that out. One of the subjects of her film that she interviewed, a white supremacist, is now on tour with her, talking about what was transformative about that question that she asked. She was brave enough to sit in front of all these different white supremacists, to go in their homes, people who hated her. Now that is courage. You mentioned courage earlier. I think once we transform our thoughts and we sit with our thoughts, we reflect, then you're thinking, what can I do? This is kind of on the far end of courage, right? To do what she did. But I think we want to put that into action somehow, to be able to participate in the transformation of another human being. Now, this is, as you said, this is what our churches and our synagogues and mosques should be doing, right? Well, maybe we need to help our faith communities go into our faith communities and say, why aren't we doing this?
That's right.
You know, President Carter has, challenged his Southern Baptist community. What about women's rights? He said that 10 years ago to 12 years ago. And constantly, what about human rights to his own faith community? So we can that's one thing we can do in a humble way, is to go into our community, whether it's a faith community or an NGO or whatever, and say, what can we do with this radical? Dr. Lester, thank you bringing the word radical into this, because that is radical. And that's what your father did, was to talk about radical love, not the easy love, but the radical, difficult process of bringing forward transformation, which is what we're talking about here.
That leads into this. Thank you, Karen. Thank you to all of our panelists. Carlos, I'm coming there next. I want us to think about this second tangible outcome, which Dr. King mentioned earlier as well, which is broadening our loyalty. So we want to commit to broadening our loyalty. And Karen just mentioned human rights. I want to talk for a few minutes, because this beloved community mindset means we're concerned about civil rights and human rights. And in fact, your father and your mother talked about this transition from, for them, civil rights to human rights. What's the difference? Can we educate and share a bit, starting with Carlos and then going to Jill? What are our civil and our human rights? Because if we're going to transform unjust systems, starting with changing cultivating a beloved community mindset, we need to know what we're doing, what we're looking at. So when we talk about civil and human rights, what are we talking about changing and cultivating and transforming?
So part of the work that we're doing in Puerto Rico is starting with the human rights, right? The right to a meal, the right to a safe roof. And we have what we call a dignity checklist here at the nonprofit. And every family that we're meeting, how do we bring dignity into their home? That's kind of our non-negotiable. Every person we interact with, dignity means a healthy meal. I don't want just a handout of a hot dog and some chips. I'm dealing with elderly people. I want to give them the best kind of food. It's kind of ridiculous that the healthy organic food has become a privilege that a lot of people don't have access to. So how do we do some healthy farming? How do we feed them with dignity? That's the human right part, right? There's a safe roof. You can lock your door. You feel safe in your home. Now the civil right part, now that's where like the whole island of Puerto Rico living under an oppressive government that sends our young men to war. And like I said, I mentioned before, where we are second-class citizens. And I have to tell you, it really is not good to be a colony of the United States and to feel like a second-class citizen, to be treated like a second-class citizen. And so that's part of the human right gets me into the one-on-one with the people that I'm loving, into my community and the work that we're doing. And that then stirs a fire to then fight for the civil rights of those people, of these communities, of a whole island that deserves to be treated as, people that are worthy of love, of representation, and all the civil rights that belong to us as much as anyone else.
That's an important distinction and an important conversation. We always mention civil and human rights, but do we know the difference, Jill?
Sure. So, there are 30 articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that map out what human rights are. Civil and political rights are a subset of human rights, so they are a part of them. This has its origin after, in the Cold War, where Western countries said, we want to champion these rights: voting, privacy, the rights that you get by being a citizen of a country. And the Eastern Bloc countries said, when those rights we're not as fond of in our systems, but a place to live, a decent place to live, education, healthcare, all the things that give a person dignity, they are all part of human rights. The blending together of those are what make human rights. In our country, we tend to use our civil rights to vote for people who will protect our human rights. But human rights belong to every person,
right,
everywhere, no matter where they're born, how they look. It is by the mere fact of being human, you are entitled to your human rights. And we don't have that mindset in our country. We rely on these civil and political rights to gain those human rights from elected officials, but we already have them. We already have them by being human. And part of what we have to do as we do this mental transformation is assert that as a given and make sure that leaders across the board know that that is a non-negotiable. I love that Carlos said dignity. Human rights are the floor of what it means to be a human. Decent food, a place to live, all of those things. When you think about it, what is more essential, the right to vote or the ability to eat? You don't think about voting if you're starving.
Right.
Hunger is a priority need. And so we have to assert this human rights mindset as part of this transformation.
Dr. King, I know your dad, when he talked about these triple evils, the more I study it, the more I think it was more bent towards human rights than civil rights, because he was talking about poverty and racism and militarism, all of those things that when we don't have civil rights to get those things in place, our humanity is impaired. When we talk about broadening our loyalty, if you and Dr. Lester could please share about how critical that is. That when we look at this world house, we're not saying these people only matter to me, but these don't. How could we even have a beloved community mindset if we don't care about everybody in the world house?
I'm going to tell this story about this young man, boy. He was out with his father fishing one day, and he just started laughing. And his father was like, well, what's funny? And the boy didn't say anything. And so the father just kind of went on, and maybe 30 minutes or so later, the little boy's laughing again. Father said, okay, Johnny, what's funny? I need to know. The boy didn't say anything, let more time pass. By this time, the father was infuriated and said, okay, if you don't tell me what's so funny, then I'm going to have to ground you when you get back home. So the little boy said, Daddy, you have a hole in your side of the boat and you're going to drown. That hole was in the entire boat. So even though the water may have been coming in on that end, eventually it's going to spread to the rest of the boat and the whole thing is going to go down. I don't think we understand how intertwined we are. I thought that the pandemic would have awakened us to that. And I kept saying, this is a message from the universe. God is talking to us right now. Thank you. We're finally going to get it. And then I've been watching us kind of settle right back in.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know who, and it's not a person. Who means group of people that will help us to realize that we have got to do things a different way. We've got to start operating totally different. Because guess what? If not, the universe is going to do it again. And God's going to allow something else to occur. And I don't know, some people like a lot of pain, I guess, keep it coming. The squeeze, squeeze it so much till you're finally saying, ouch, okay, I get it. But that's where we are. It took me a while to understand, being a Black person in America, everything as you're growing up, you sift through the eyes of being Black. You feel like everything that happens is because of racism. That's the way I used to feel. I used to get angry. I used to get pissed off, everything. And, as I continue to grow up, develop, and travel around the world, I realized that injustice is everywhere and it impacts a lot of different people. Inequity is everywhere, impacts a lot of people. The percentages are different. We know that the Black and brown community, there's greater disparities. But that has nothing to do with the proper mindset and the proper policies that you put in place so that these kind of things don't happen across the globe. You have to begin to see that it doesn't matter who that person is, where they're from, how they identify themselves. They are part of our world. We are connected in so many different ways. It's unbelievable. And so this mindset of approaching things from how can we make this world better for all people is so critical if we're going to save the world.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Lester.
Yeah, I want to add to that really excellent and profound commentary here, this notion of humanity being at the center of this. If we can find, for example, if you're talking about expanding our circle of influence or broadening the net here, I think we also, those who are believers, also have to engage with people who are non-believers. And the place where people can intersect is that place at humanity, which is why we have created here at Project Humanity something called Humanity 101. This is the plug: compassion, empathy, forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, and self-reflection. We can be as separate as the fingers, yet one is the hand. But the reality here is that we can find common ground, and we can find ways in which we have to convince ourselves that if we are not looking at justice intersectionally, what are we missing out on? Who are we not engaging with? What blessing, what gift are we not getting because we are discriminating against somebody else because of how they look, how they dress, who they love? So there's a way in which justice cannot be something that you imagine, or I imagine, in a box. It's looking at justice in a way that defies what we know absolutely is injustice against anybody, whether they are like us or not. And I think we have to bring non-believers into the conversation with believers, just like we have to have Republicans talking to Democrats and independents, old people talking to young people. India Ari told us that. That would make us all good people.
Better people,
That
better.
would make us all good and better people if we just talk to each other and listened and listen. So that's what our little tagline here at Project Humanity is: talking, listening, connecting. A little bit of TLC can take us a long way.
As we actually, it feels like we've just been talking for 10 minutes. but we're concluding this panel. We want to be sure you have these tangible outcomes that we want to take away. The first one was we want to commit to cultivating a beloved community mindset. And our panelists reminded us that in order to do that, we can't just get rid of a mindset. We have to have something to put in its place. So we also have to think about, who do I want to be on the other side? The second tangible outcome, we want everybody who's involved in this summit, who's paying attention, who's tweeting about it, who's sharing with family members, to commit to broadening our loyalty, extending ourselves beyond what's comfortable for us, and saying, how can I demonstrate and be loved? Check the shirt. It's the King Center movement. Be loved to the entire world house. Third tangible outcome we want you all to do every day when you think about it. How can you engage in coalitions and partnerships? We're all here together representing, our panelists representing different organizations, but as you hear them talk, don't they have the same ideas in mind? The same things we want to accomplish? So we want you to do this. Commit to partnerships. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, I'll nettlesome tasks, Dr. King. Sometimes I say Dr. King and I'm talking about Bernice King. I'll say I talked to her last night, and I get concerned because people look at me like, you talked to Dr. Luther King Jr.? I said, no, I talked to Bernice King. I want to clarify, Dr. Bernice King. He said our nettlesome task is to organize our strength into compelling power. And we want people everywhere, as a result of this summit, to commit to joining with coalitions, partnering with different, we don't have to do this alone. We change our mindsets, we cultivate different mindsets, but when we get to transforming unjust systems, I want to close with that question. How important is it to organize into partnerships to do this work?
I wanted to jump in on that because as we're talking about human rights, this is actually a map for us to work together. Jill mentioned the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and this came about, by the way, the people who wrote that, Eleanor Roosevelt was involved in that, very, very crucial to that. But people drew on their faith traditions to write that document. The first thing I would recommend is for people to go and read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's very inspiring. And then to realize that it's a blueprint for us to act. If we have a right under the Declaration to an adequate standard of living, which is included, an adequate standard of living, that means a right to housing, a right to clean water, a right to nutritious. Those are all included in those rights. So how do we, instead of just a slogan on a placard in front of, walking down the street, you can actually litigate these things. Right here in the city of Atlanta, we have too many homeless people. We have a right to housing here. Well, there is a right to housing. So how would we materialize that for people? That means we have to challenge the housing policies of the city. So let all the housing groups get together. Let's all get together. Let's talk about how do we bring about the right to housing? If you did that, many of the groups working on homelessness have found a solution: housing first. Bring the support services around the person who has a safe place to be. These all have, so any problem that you're thinking about, there is a human right associated with it that you can mobilize around and hold your own government accountable to that right.
Organize into partnership around homelessness, around any issue.
Any issue that's important.
Carlos, you seem to be doing that in Puerto Rico, organizing into partnership to get things done. You talk about that for a moment as we close our panel today.
We almost have to go back to the beginning, which is doing the work, right? The work of the mind, of the heart, the work of ourselves. I've been to enough pastors' meetings. Well, let's unite the city, and it's meant to be a prayer meeting, and it turns into like everybody's, sharing what the next conference they're going to have in their own churches. I've been to enough gatherings where we're trying to, okay, let's tackle this one issue together. But if you haven't done the deep work of dealing with the ego, with the desire for attention, of that insecurity on the inside that I've been guilty of so many times, of trying to be something that you're not. And so doing the work of self-love, of loving myself, of loving my community, of appreciating the maybe smaller work that I'm doing compared to other people, I think it's necessary to go back to the beginning of the thought audit of, if I'm here in this space of wanting partnership, like the work that we're doing here in Puerto Rico with so many organizations, local government, local leaders, other organizations that come from all around the world to support us, it starts with the individuals here in our own organization being welcoming, not being threatened by that partnership. The inner work of saying yes to the person that's wanting to do work with you, and they might do it differently. And instead of you trying to impose the way that you do the work, actually learning from the way that they do the work. And so in a way, this ending of partnership has to start with the beginning of the work that we're doing on the inside, to come with a clean heart, to do the work that matters together.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Dr. Lester. Thank you, Jill.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Karen Diane. Thank you, Dr. King. Thank you to all of you viewing. Thank you for joining this panel discussion. And stay tuned. There's another panel coming up on how did we get here, thinking that got us where we are. It's a very important discussion as well. So we hope you'll be with us for the duration of today and tomorrow for the 2023 Beloved Community Global Summit.